Good morning. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today, we're going to look at some other verses outside of Revelation that point forward to Revelation. I'm calling this one Bible Passages Concerning the End Times. We have a tendency of focusing on the book of Revelation in an attempt to understand what is to occur in the end times. Yet there are many other passages that also tell us of these events. There are multiple verses in the Bible that remind us that with 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is settled. And these other verses demonstrate that more than one author used by the Holy Spirit told us of these things. Today we're going to look at 4 of those: Daniel 9, Daniel 12, Matthew 24, and Luke 21. Let's start with Daniel 9. Verse 27 says this: "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate." Most of Daniel 9 includes prophecies concerning the first coming of Jesus, and we will discuss that at some other time, particularly the 70 weeks of Daniel. But verse 27 focuses on the tribulation. 1 week in these prophetic Bible verses actually means 7 years, and the middle of the week would be 3.5 years. There are 2 specific and important events here in this verse: the abomination of desolation and the end to sacrifice and offering. I will discuss this again a little later, but here's another important passage from Daniel, and Michael the angel is speaking. So we're looking at Daniel 12, verses 4 through 13, and it says this: "At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood 2 others, one on this river bank and the other on that river bank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, 'How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be?' Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, 'My Lord, what shall be the end of these things?' And he said, 'Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days." Aren't Michael's instructions interesting? For Daniel to seal up the book, seal the words of this book until the end times. And in those days, knowledge shall increase, and people will be running to and fro. I'm not sure if this last phrase refers to the mindless, busy behavior of people today, the ability to move so easily and quickly between continents, or both, but it sure sounds like we're in the end times. When I went to Israel, one aspect I never will forget was the distance between locations. And Jesus walked. For example, it was 75 miles between the Sea of Galilee and Jerusalem. And that was a walk they made multiple times. When's the last time we walked 150 miles round trip? Knowledge has increased too. Computers and even smartphones make it much easier to research different topics. But maybe the increase in knowledge is also destructive. For example, through scientific knowledge, man has built bombs capable of destroying the earth. There might be more knowledge, but on the other hand, there is a vast disconnect between having that knowledge and then creating what will destroy us and end all life. This chapter also discusses the abomination of desolation. This event will occur at the midpoint of the tribulation, and it points to the Antichrist setting up an image of himself in the Jewish temple, seemingly in Israel, though that does not exist presently. In fact, that is the only unfulfilled prophecy that must still occur before the return of Jesus. At that time, the Antichrist's claim to be God, making an image to himself in the temple, and putting an end to sacrifices and offerings, will all desecrate the temple. This event will be the final fulfillment of this prophecy from Daniel. But we also can see that this was partially fulfilled earlier. Antiochus Epiphanes, a Greek king from 175 BC to 164 BC, offered sacrifices to Greek gods in the Jewish temple and replaced the Jewish sacrifices and offerings by sacrificing pigs inside. Antiochus Epiphanes is biblical typology of the Antichrist. Time, times, and half a time is another of those terms we need to understand. Time means 1 year, times means 2 years, and half a time means half a year. Add those together, and it is simply another way of saying 3.5 years, the time of the Great Tribulation. Times is a duality in Hebrew, similar to the word both in English. 1,290 days is also 3.5 years, with months in the Jewish calendar having 30 days. Both of the passages in Daniel refer to the Antichrist putting an end to both sacrifice and offering in the temple. Next, we will look at 2 passages where Jesus speaks of future events. When Jesus and his apostles departed the Seder in the upper room, they headed for the Mount of Olives and then the Garden of Gethsemane. The conversation that occurred upon arriving at the Mount of Olives, which was recorded in both Matthew and Luke, has been referred to as the Olivet Discourse. Mark 13, verses 1 through 23, also records this conversation, but specifically mentions that it was not with all of the disciples, but with 2 sets of brothers, Peter and Andrew, along with James and John. When reading Matthew 24 and Luke 21 back to back, many similarities are apparent, but in the same manner, there are many differences. The first aspect to consider is who wrote each account and when. Matthew was one of the original 12 apostles called by Jesus. He also is identified as a tax collector, certainly not the most notable of occupations in that day or in ours. He also was Jewish. Certainly, Matthew's account is a first-person narrative as he walked with Jesus on that night. Luke lived in Antioch, was a Gentile physician, and a friend of Paul's. Luke did not walk with Jesus on that night before our Lord's crucifixion, but that does not mean that the words in Luke are in question. Let's begin by reading these passages back to back, and we're going to start with Matthew 24, verses 3 through 31. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to the tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, Look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, Look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms. Do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there are the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give out its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now let's read the passage in Luke. Luke 21, verses 5 through 28 says this. Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, These things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. So they asked him, saying, Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place? And he said, Take heed that you not be deceived, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is drawn near. Therefore do not go after them. But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines, and pestilences, and there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. But before all these things they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, but it will turn out for you as an occasion for testimony. Therefore settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience, possess your souls. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For there are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. In the passage in Matthew, Jesus identifies certain events as the beginning of sorrows, events that will occur before the tribulation, wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, kingdom rising against kingdom, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes, all in various places. These events seem to occur before the tribulation. The biggest difference between the two accounts seems to be one of timing. For example, Matthew 24, verse 5 refers to wars and rumors of wars occurring, but being a sign, as the end is not yet. After that, according to Matthew 24, verse 6, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Then there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. According to Matthew 24, verse 8, Jesus identified this time as the beginning of sorrows. After that, in Matthew 24, verse 9, he warns that the Jews will endure extreme persecution with intent of death. Luke, on the other hand, takes a different view. Luke 21:10 identifies the same progression of nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and also mentions the famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places in Luke 21:11. Yet Luke also adds in two other events joined with those: fearful sights and great signs from heaven. The most important difference occurs immediately following that passage. While Matthew placed those events immediately before the persecution of the people, Luke says this in Luke 21, verse 12, "But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. You will be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake." It seems to be a huge contradiction, though some Bible scholars have pointed out an interesting nugget of information. Many believe that Matthew's account applies directly to the Jews who are alive in the tribulation, whereas Luke's account is speaking directly to the formerly Jewish early Christians concerning their not-so-distant future of persecution. Luke does conclude, though, with the coming of the Son of Man. Other less obvious differences have Luke mentioning that not one stone will be left on another in Luke 21:6, seemingly pointing to what happens at the hands of the Romans in AD 70, while Matthew does not mention that phrase. Another difference is that Luke specifically mentions the city of Jerusalem, but Matthew does not. Matthew 24:15 specifically names the abomination of desolation prophesied about in Daniel, while Luke speaks of the event without giving it a name. While Matthew warns the Jews not to take any extra time and to leave immediately in Matthew 24, verses 16 through 20, Luke also warns the people who are not in Israel that they should not return there. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, lest those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. Luke 21:21. Luke alone states that Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the fullness of the Gentiles is complete. And that's verse 24 of Luke 21. And certainly Gentiles are still trampling Jerusalem today, and that includes Arabs. Also, Matthew states that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Verse 22 of Matthew 24. Luke does not mention that verse at all. This also seems to point to the teaching that Luke refers to the first century believers, while Matthew points to the believers before the tribulation and in the tribulation. As humans, our initial response can be one of doubt. If both are not stating exactly the same words or sentiments, then one has to be right and the other has to be wrong. Yet we need to understand the far-reaching ramifications of God's prophecy. Those words can apply just as sweetly and accurately to the first century Christians faced with the persecution from both Jews and Romans, as it does to the believers in Jesus Christ alive in the tribulation, a period that has no rival in the earth's history when it comes to persecution. Imagine the implications of that last statement, as we all know what the Jews endured in Nazi Germany. The tribulation will be much worse. And as Zechariah 13:8 tells us, 2/3 of the Jews alive in that time will die, but 1/3 will come through that time with Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. We will begin the seal judgments tomorrow. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.